The entire plane fell silent as Isaiah Washington's booming voice cut through the cabin. "You're grounding this aircraft right now." On the phone screen, his ID badge glowed, FBI Assistant Director. The flight attendant who'd refused his daughter a blanket paled. What began as racial discrimination was now a federal incident. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever witnessed discrimination or stood up against injustice. The courage this young girl showed in the face of prejudice will leave you speechless. 12-year-old Zara Washington clutched her boarding pass tightly as she moved through the terminal at Logan International Airport in Boston. Her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was her first time flying alone, but the anticipation of seeing her father in Atlanta overshadowed her nervousness. Isaiah Washington had promised to take her to the newly opened Civil Rights Museum, a trip they'd been planning for months. "You've got this, Zara," she whispered to herself, repeating the affirmation her mother Diana had taught her. Despite her young age, Zara carried herself with remarkable poise. A straight-A student with a passion for social justice inherited from both parents, she'd been raised to be confident yet humble. At the gate, Zara double-checked her documents and the special minor traveling alone tag attached to her small carry-on backpack. The gate agent smiled professionally as she scanned Zara's first-class boarding pass. "First group boarding now," the agent announced over the PA system. "First-class passengers and those needing special assistance may board at this time." Zara stepped forward, boarding pass extended. A middle-aged white couple behind her nudged each other. "Excuse me, young lady," the man said, placing his hand on Zara's shoulder. "They've called first class. You'll need to wait for general boarding." Zara turned, her expression neutral despite the familiar sting. "I'm in first class, sir," she replied quietly, showing him her boarding pass. The man's eyebrows shot up in surprise. His wife pulled him back slightly. "Oh, I see," he muttered, not quite apologizing. The gate agent intervened, "She's correct, sir. Please proceed, Miss Washington." The agent gave Zara an understanding nod as she moved past. As Zara settled into seat 3A, she placed her backpack carefully under the seat in front and took out the book her father had sent her, a young reader's edition of March by Congressman John Lewis. She'd already read it twice but wanted to refresh her memory before their museum visit. A flight attendant with Heather Reynolds on her name tag moved efficiently through the cabin, greeting passengers with practiced warmth. When she reached Zara, however, her smile noticeably cooled. "Do you need help finding your seat?" Heather asked, her tone suggesting Zara didn't belong. "No thank you, I'm in the right seat," Zara replied politely, handing over her boarding pass for verification. Heather checked it with obvious surprise, then handed it back without the warm welcome she'd offered other passengers. "Make sure your seatbelt is fastened properly," she instructed before quickly moving on to greet the white businessman in 3B with a much warmer, "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" Zara sank deeper into her seat, pretending to be absorbed in her book. This wasn't new to her. Her parents had prepared her for these moments, though they never stopped stinging. As the plane filled and prepared for takeoff, Zara observed Heather's interactions. Pre-departure beverages for the businessmen. Extra pillows for the elderly white woman across the aisle. Friendly conversation with the teenage white boy traveling alone in 2C. For Zara, only perfunctory, minimal interaction. Once airborne, the cabin temperature began dropping noticeably. Zara, wearing only a light sweater over her t-shirt, felt goosebumps rising on her arms. She watched as Heather distributed blankets to several passengers who requested them. When Heather passed by her row again, Zara raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me, may I have a blanket, please? It's a bit cold." Heather barely paused. "We've run out. Sorry." She continued down the aisle without making eye contact. Confused, Zara glanced toward the overhead compartments where she'd seen Heather retrieve blankets for other passengers. Through the partially open bin, she could clearly see several more neatly stacked blankets inside. Zara hugged herself for warmth, wondering if she had somehow misunderstood. The aircraft's air conditioning system seemed to intensify as the flight progressed. Zara could see her breath fogging slightly when she exhaled. She rubbed her hands together, trying to generate warmth while observing other first-class passengers comfortably wrapped in their airline-provided blankets. After 30 minutes of shivering, Zara spotted a different flight attendant, a younger man whose name tag read Bradley Wilson, making his way through the cabin with a coffee service. "Excuse me," Zara called softly as he approached her row. "I'm really cold. Could I please have a blanket?" Bradley offered a genuine smile. "Of course you can. Let me finish with the beverages, and I'll grab one for you." Zara nodded gratefully, watching as he completed serving the row ahead of her. When Bradley turned toward the overhead bin, Heather suddenly appeared at his side. "What are you doing?" she asked in a hushed but sharp tone. "Getting a blanket for the young lady in 3A, Bradley replied. Heather placed a hand on his arm. "I already told her we're out. We need to save the remaining ones for our priority customers." Her emphasis on priority wasn't subtle. Bradley glanced between Heather and Zara, conflict evident on his face. "But I just saw at least 6. I've been working this route for 15 years, Heather cut him off. "Trust me on this." Bradley's shoulders slumped slightly as he turned back to Zara. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It seems we are out after all." Zara nodded, fighting back tears of frustration. "I understand. Thank you anyway." Across the aisle, an elderly black woman with silver-streaked hair had been observing the interaction. As Bradley moved on with his service cart, she leaned slightly toward Zara. "Excuse me, young lady," she said in a warm, low voice. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood. Would you like to share my blanket? It's plenty large enough." Zara looked up, meeting kind eyes that held a knowing expression. "Thank you, ma'am, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "Nonsense," Eleanor replied, already unfolding her blanket. "At my age, I've learned to pack an extra layer. This blanket is just a luxury for me, but it seems like a necessity for you right now." With graceful efficiency, Eleanor extended half the blanket across the aisle. Zara accepted it gratefully, immediately feeling relief as the warmth enveloped her. "Thank you so much, Ms. Blackwood." "Eleanor, please," the woman insisted. "And you are?" "Zara Washington." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Well, Zara Washington, sometimes we have to help each other when systems fail us." Lowering her voice, Eleanor continued, "I noticed what happened earlier. It wasn't right." Zara glanced down. "Maybe they really did run out." "Child, I've been flying since before that flight attendant was born," Eleanor replied. "I know the difference between we're out and not for you. It's important you learn to recognize it too. Not to make you bitter, but to help you navigate this world." As they continued their quiet conversation, Zara learned that Eleanor was a retired educator traveling to visit her grandchildren in Atlanta. Their discussion shifted to Zara's upcoming visit to the Civil Rights Museum, and Eleanor shared personal stories of participating in sit-ins during the 1960s. "Your generation needs to know these stories," Eleanor emphasized. "Not just the big names everyone knows, but the everyday resistance that—" "Excuse me." Heather had returned, her voice cutting through their conversation. Her eyes fixed coldly on the shared blanket. "I'm going to have to ask you to refrain from passing items between seats during the flight," she stated. "It's a safety violation." Eleanor's eyebrow rose skeptically. "In my 76 years and countless flights, I've never heard of such a regulation." "It's airline policy," Heather insisted. "I need you to take your blanket back, ma'am." Eleanor straightened her posture, her dignified bearing making her seem taller than her physical height. "May I see that policy in writing, please?" A flash of annoyance crossed Heather's face. "I don't have to show you anything." As a flight attendant, my instructions regarding safety must be followed. Eleanor held Heather's gaze steadily. I understand the authority of flight attendants regarding genuine safety concerns. However, two passengers sharing a blanket poses no conceivable safety risk. Several nearby passengers were now watching the interaction. Heather, aware of the attention, lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. Take the blanket back now, or I'll have to report both of you for non-compliance with crew member instructions. Reluctantly, Eleanor reclaimed her blanket, offering Zara an apologetic look. I'm sorry, dear. It's okay, Zara whispered back, though the cold immediately began seeping through her clothes again. As Heather walked away, Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, discreetly passing it to Zara. Eleanor Blackwood, attorney at law, retired, it read, with a personal phone number handwritten on the back. Some battles are too small to fight alone, Eleanor whispered. But they're still worth fighting. 2 days earlier, Zara had stood in her mother's bedroom in their Cambridge townhouse, watching as Diana Washington meticulously checked the contents of Zara's small suitcase for the third time. Mom, I've got everything, Zara insisted, trying not to sound impatient. Dad already confirmed he has toiletries for me at his place. Diana's hands hesitated over the neatly folded clothes. I know, sweetie. I just want to make sure you're prepared. She closed the suitcase and turned to face her daughter. You have your phone fully charged? Emergency contacts? Medication for motion sickness? Yes to all three, Zara confirmed, holding up her phone with its newly installed tracking app, a compromise that had helped ease Diana's concerns about the solo trip. Since the divorce 2 years ago, Isaiah Washington had maintained a close relationship with his daughter despite the geographical distance. His transfer to the FBI's Atlanta field office had been a career advancement he couldn't refuse, though leaving Zara had been the hardest decision of his life. Their weekly video calls and monthly visits had maintained their bond, but this would be Zara's first time flying alone to see him. Diana sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. When Zara joined her, she took her daughter's hands in hers. You remember what we've talked about, right? About moving through the world? Zara nodded. This was familiar territory. Head high, be polite but firm, know my rights, and pick my battles, she recited. Diana smiled sadly. Yes. And? Document everything, and call you or Dad if I feel unsafe, Zara finished. That's my girl. Diana hugged her tightly. Your father and I don't always agree on everything, but we both want you to be safe and strong. What Diana didn't mention was the late-night phone call she'd had with Isaiah the previous evening, voicing her concerns about Zara traveling alone. She's just 12, Isaiah, Diana had argued. Surely the museum will still be there during her summer break when I can come too. She'll be fine, Isaiah had reassured her, his deep voice confident through the phone. Zara's more capable than most adults I know. And it's not just about the museum, she needs this independence. The world won't always make space for her, she needs to learn to navigate it. What neither parent said aloud was their shared understanding of what, navigate it, truly meant for their black daughter in America. As Assistant Director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, Isaiah Washington had built his career investigating hate crimes and institutional discrimination. His work had made him both respected and controversial, a black man with significant power within a system historically used against his own people. He walked a delicate line every day, using his position to create change while recognizing its limitations. At his apartment in Atlanta, Isaiah prepared Zara's room with the same meticulous attention Diana had shown. Fresh sheets on the bed. Her favorite snacks in the pantry. A stack of new books he thought she might enjoy. And on her nightstand, a gift, a leather-bound journal embossed with her initials. Inside the front cover, he'd written, "For my daughter, who will write her own history. Your voice matters. Your experiences matter. Your truth matters. Love, Dad." Back on the plane, Zara's teeth had started to chatter from the cold. She pulled out her phone, debating whether to text her father. She didn't want to seem like she was complaining over something small, but she was genuinely uncomfortable. Finally, she composed a message: "Hi Dad, flight going okay? Kind of cold up here though. Looking forward to seeing you soon." She kept it light, but Isaiah Washington had spent his career reading between lines. When his phone buzzed with Zara's message, he immediately recognized the understatement for what it was. His daughter rarely mentioned discomfort unless it was significant. "Temperature issues on the plane," he texted back. "Do they have blankets?" Zara hesitated before responding. "They said they ran out." "No big deal." 3 dots appeared as Isaiah typed his response, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Is everyone else without blankets too?" It was the question Zara had been dreading. Her father could always cut to the heart of a situation. She considered deflecting but decided on honesty. "Not exactly. Just me, it seems." Isaiah's response came quickly: "I see. Keep me updated. Love you." Meanwhile, in the galley at the front of the plane, Bradley approached Heather as she arranged a tray of beverages. "Hey, about that blanket situation," he began cautiously. "There are definitely more in the overhead. I counted at least 6 when I was getting pillows earlier." Heather barely looked up. "Bradley, you're new, so let me explain something. We have limited resources on these flights. We need to prioritize our frequent flyers and full-fare passengers." "But she's in first class," Bradley pointed out. "Doesn't that make her a full-fare passenger?" "Look," Heather said, lowering her voice, "between us, these upgraded passengers aren't the same as those who actually pay for first class. They're just taking advantage of the system." Bradley frowned. "Her ticket didn't say upgraded though. And even if it was, isn't that allowed?" "You're missing the point," Heather snapped. "In my experience, these people are always demanding special treatment. Give an inch, they take a mile. Trust me, I've been doing this long enough to know." Bradley remained silent, uncomfortable with the implication behind "these people." It wasn't his first time encountering such attitudes from senior crew members. At his previous airline, a similar situation had resulted in a formal complaint against another flight attendant, a woman who had subsequently transferred to this very airline after being reprimanded. As Bradley returned to the cabin, he noticed a young white girl, approximately Zara's age, boarding as part of the connecting passenger group during the brief stopover they'd had in New York. When she mentioned feeling chilly to Heather, he watched as Heather immediately retrieved a blanket from the very compartment she'd claimed was empty, handing it over with a warm smile. "Here you go, sweetheart. Let me know if you need anything else." Bradley's discomfort deepened as he caught Zara's eye. The girl had witnessed the entire interaction, her expression carefully neutral despite the obvious unfairness. The slight straightening of her shoulders told Bradley everything he needed to know about her awareness of the situation. After witnessing the white girl receive a blanket, Zara felt a mixture of emotions wash over her. The familiar sting of unfair treatment. The frustration of being gaslighted, told there were no blankets when there clearly were. The exhaustion of wondering whether to speak up or let it go. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, "Pick your battles, but don't let injustice slide because it's convenient." Carefully, Zara pulled out her phone and opened the camera app. She positioned it casually on her lap, angled to capture the aisle and the overhead bins, and hit record. Documentation, just as her parents had taught her. Gathering her courage, Zara pressed the call button. After several minutes, Bradley appeared instead of Heather. "Can I help you?" he asked quietly. "I'd like to request a blanket again, please," Zara stated firmly but politely. "I noticed another passenger just received one, so I know they're available." Bradley's expression showed his discomfort. "Let me check with. Is there a problem here?" Heather had appeared behind him, her voice carrying a warning tone. "No problem," Zara replied calmly. "I was just requesting a blanket. I've noticed several passengers receiving them after I was told you were out, including someone who just boarded during our connection. Heather's smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm afraid you must be mistaken. We have very limited supplies. Zara maintained eye contact. I'm not mistaken. I've been watching carefully. The girl in 2B just received one. There seem to be blankets for some passengers but not for others. The implied accusation hung in the air. Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to listen while others watched with open interest. Are you suggesting something, young lady? Heather's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. I'm just stating facts, Zara replied. And requesting equal treatment. Heather leaned closer, lowering her voice. You're being disruptive and difficult. This kind of behavior could get you reported. We don't tolerate troublemakers in first class. From across the aisle, Eleanor Blackwood cleared her throat loudly. Excuse me, but I believe this child is making a reasonable request. As a passenger, she has certain rights to comfort and equal service. Heather straightened, turning her cold smile to Eleanor. With all due respect, ma'am, this doesn't concern you. When I witness discrimination, it absolutely concerns me, Eleanor replied, her voice calm but carrying authority. In my professional opinion as a retired civil rights attorney, selective service based on a passenger's race could constitute a violation of federal laws governing common carriers. The cabin had grown noticeably quiet. Bradley stood frozen, looking increasingly distressed. I am not discriminating against anyone, Heather hissed, though her rising color suggested otherwise. This is about a child being demanding and not understanding airline procedures. Then perhaps you could explain those procedures, Eleanor suggested. Why was this child told there were no blankets, only for another child to receive one moments later? We're all curious to understand the selection criteria. Several passengers nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Heather's expression hardened. If you continue to disrupt this flight with these baseless accusations, I'll have security meet the plane and have you moved to economy class for the remainder of the flight. Zara felt her heart racing but kept her expression neutral as her phone continued recording. She was scared but determined not to show it. This was exactly the kind of situation her parents had prepared her for, but experiencing it firsthand was still overwhelming. May I call my father? Zara asked quietly. He's meeting me at the airport and should know if there's going to be an issue with my seating. You can call him after we land, Heather replied dismissively. Now, I need to continue with my duties. This conversation is over. As Heather turned to leave, Zara made a decision. She raised her phone and hit the speed dial for her father. When he answered immediately, the relief in her voice was palpable. Dad? I'm having a situation on the flight. Her carefully maintained composure finally cracked. They won't give me a blanket, and now they're threatening to move me to economy because I asked why. Her voice broke slightly. Put the flight attendant on the phone, Isaiah's voice came through clearly, his tone shifting instantly from concerned father to professional authority. Zara held out the phone. My father would like to speak with you. Heather hesitated, then reluctantly took the phone, clearly expecting to deal with an overprotective parent she could easily dismiss. This is Senior Flight Attendant Reynolds speaking, she began confidently. I want to assure you that everything is under. The expression on her face changed as she listened to the voice on the other end of the line. What did you think about Heather's behavior toward Zara? Comment number 1 if you believe Heather was clearly discriminating against Zara because of her race. Comment number 2 if you think there might be a legitimate reason for denying only Zara a blanket. Hit that like button if you admire Zara's courage to stand up for herself despite being just 12 years old. Do you think Zara's father will be able to resolve this situation from the ground, or will this confrontation continue to escalate? Let's find out what happens when an FBI assistant director gets involved in what started as a simple request for a blanket. Yes, this is Heather Reynolds, Senior Flight Attendant, she repeated, her professional tone wavering slightly as she listened to the voice on the other end of the line. The cabin remained eerily quiet as passengers strained to hear the conversation. Bradley hovered nearby, his discomfort visible as he glanced between Heather and Zara. "I understand your concern, sir," Heather continued, "but I assure you there's been a misunderstanding. We simply ran out of..." She stopped abruptly as Isaiah's voice cut through her explanation. Even from across the aisle, Eleanor could hear the deep, authoritative tone coming through the phone speaker, though she couldn't make out the exact words. "Sir, I don't know who you claim to be, but making threats won't help this situation," Heather replied, her voice hardening again. "Your daughter has been disruptive, and..." Again, she was interrupted. This time, Heather's expression shifted from dismissive to uncertain as Isaiah apparently identified himself more specifically. "Anyone can claim to be FBI," she said, but with noticeably less conviction. "I'd need to verify." Zara, whose phone was still in Heather's hand, quickly swiped to her photos and pulled up a recent picture of herself with her father at his office, his credentials clearly visible. She held the screen up for Heather to see. "That's my dad," Zara said quietly. "Assistant Director Isaiah Washington, FBI Civil Rights Division." Heather's complexion paled visibly as she looked between the photo and the phone in her hand. On the screen, Isaiah had apparently switched to video call, as his face was now visible, wearing the same stern expression as in the photo but in real time. "Ms. Reynolds," Isaiah's voice came through clearly now, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I want to be absolutely clear about what's happening. I am recording this conversation. I have reason to believe my daughter is being discriminated against on your flight. She has reported being denied a standard service that other passengers are receiving." Heather tried to regain her composure. "Sir, as I was explaining, we have limited. My daughter has video documentation of other passengers receiving blankets after she was told there were none available," Isaiah continued, his voice level but intense. "Furthermore, I've been informed by her and another passenger that threats were made to remove her from her ticketed seat class in retaliation for making a simple service request. Are you aware that discriminatory treatment based on race by common carriers is a violation of federal law under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act?" The color drained further from Heather's face. Several passengers were now openly watching, some with phones partially raised, though not yet recording. "I wasn't, that is, I didn't," Heather stammered. "Here's what's going to happen now," Isaiah continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "First, my daughter will immediately receive the same level of service as other passengers in her class, including a blanket. Second, you will issue a formal apology to her. Third, I want your full name and employee ID documented, along with the names of all crew members present for this incident." Bradley, who had been hovering nervously nearby, stepped forward. "Ms. Reynolds, there are blankets in the forward bin. I can get one." "Stay out of this," Heather snapped at him before turning her attention back to the phone. "Mr. Washington, I believe you're blowing this situation out of proportion. No formal discrimination has occurred. This is simply a misunderstanding about available resources." Isaiah's response was immediate. "Ms. Reynolds, let me be perfectly clear. If these three simple requests are not met immediately, I will ensure that this aircraft is met by TSA officials and FBI agents upon landing for a full investigation into civil rights violations. Every passenger will be interviewed, all records will be subpoenaed, and this will become a much larger issue for both you personally and your airline." The captain's voice suddenly came through the cabin intercom. "This is Captain Sullivan. Would the lead flight attendant please come to the cockpit?" Someone had apparently informed the captain of the unfolding situation. Heather looked torn between continuing the phone conversation and responding to her superior's summons. "I need to speak with the captain," she said stiffly, handing the phone back to Zara. "This matter isn't closed." As Heather hurried toward the cockpit, Bradley quickly retrieved a blanket from the overhead bin and handed it to Zara. "I'm sorry about this," he whispered before following Heather toward the front of the plane. Zara put the phone back to her ear. "Dad? Are you still there?" "I'm here, sweetheart," Isaiah replied, his voice immediately softening when speaking to his daughter. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Zara said, though her hands were still shaking slightly. "Just a little rattled." "You're doing great," Isaiah assured her. "I'm proud of how you're handling this. Now listen carefully, keep your phone handy and keep recording if anything else happens. I'm going to call the airline's corporate office directly and make them aware of the situation." From across the aisle, Eleanor gave Zara an encouraging nod. "Your father sounds like quite the formidable ally," she remarked once Zara had ended the call. "He doesn't usually pull the FBI card," Zara explained quietly. "He says his position is a responsibility, not a privilege. But sometimes." She trailed off, wrapping the newly provided blanket around her shoulders. "Sometimes injustice requires a proportional response," Eleanor finished for her, smiling approvingly. In the cockpit, Captain James Sullivan listened with growing concern as Heather explained the situation, or rather, her version of it. "So this child is making accusations of discrimination because of a blanket," he clarified, his expression skeptical. "Yes, and now her father is threatening to have federal agents meet the plane," Heather added. "He claims to be FBI, but anyone can say that on the phone." The first officer, Michael Rivera, looked up from the instruments. "Did you get his name?" "Washington. Isaiah Washington," Heather replied. "Claims to be an assistant director or something." Captain Sullivan and First Officer Rivera exchanged glances. "Let me get this straight," Sullivan said slowly. "You're in a dispute with the daughter of Isaiah Washington?" "The Isaiah Washington who recently led the investigation into that major civil rights violation case in Minneapolis? The one who testifies before Congress regularly?" Heather's already pale face turned nearly white. I don't follow the news much." Sullivan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Michael, can you pull up the passenger manifest? Let's verify if this is actually his daughter." Rivera tapped on the tablet beside him, then nodded. "Zara Washington, age 12, first class seat 3A. Unaccompanied minor status, listed contact is Isaiah Washington in Atlanta." Sullivan turned back to Heather. "Reynolds, this is now a potentially serious situation. I need you to tell me exactly what happened, and I mean exactly." As Heather began recounting the events, now with notable omissions and alterations, Sullivan's frown deepened. He could tell he wasn't getting the full story. "Wait here," he instructed after she finished. Removing his headset, he stood. "I'm going to assess this situation myself." Meanwhile, Isaiah Washington was on his office phone, his tone professional but firm as he spoke with the airline's customer relations director. "This isn't about my daughter receiving special treatment," he clarified. "This is about her receiving equal treatment. The discrimination she's experiencing is exactly the kind my division investigates. I'd prefer to handle this informally, but I'm prepared to escalate if necessary." The director, suddenly dealing with a PR nightmare in the making, was quick to assure him that the airline took such allegations extremely seriously. "I've already contacted the flight deck," the director explained. "Captain Sullivan has been made aware of the situation. We will conduct a full investigation." "That's appreciated," Isaiah replied, "but it doesn't address the immediate situation. My daughter is still on that flight with an attendant who has displayed clear discriminatory behavior. I want assurance that she'll be treated respectfully for the remainder of the journey." As they continued discussing the matter, Isaiah pulled up the airline's history of discrimination complaints on his computer. The pattern he saw only reinforced his concerns. This wasn't an isolated incident but potentially part of a systemic issue that had gone unaddressed for too long. Captain Sullivan made his way through the first-class cabin, his presence immediately drawing attention from the passengers. He stopped at Zara's seat, introducing himself with a professional but friendly demeanor. "Miss Washington. I'm Captain Sullivan. I understand there's been some confusion about our service today." Zara looked up at him, measuring her response carefully. "I wouldn't call it confusion, sir. I was told there were no blankets available while watching other passengers receive them. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. I see. And you believe this was because? I can't speak to intentions, Zara replied, surprising the captain with her diplomatic answer. I can only tell you what happened. I was cold, I requested a blanket twice, I was told there were none, and then I watched as other passengers received them. Eleanor Blackwood leaned forward slightly. Captain, if I may. I witnessed the entire sequence of events, as did several other passengers in this section. The disparate treatment was quite apparent, as was the threatening response when this young lady questioned it. Sullivan glanced around, noting several passengers nodding in agreement. His expression remained neutral, but inwardly he was calculating the growing liability with each passing minute. Miss Washington, I want to assure you that our airline does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. I'll be looking into this matter personally, and will ensure you're comfortable for the remainder of the flight. His response was measured and corporate, designed to acknowledge without admitting fault. Zara recognized the approach from watching her father handle delicate situations. Thank you, Captain Sullivan, she replied. I appreciate your concern. As Sullivan turned to leave, Zara added, my father mentioned he'd like documentation of this incident. Could you provide that? Sullivan paused, careful with his response. We have protocols for filing formal complaints. A customer service representative can assist with that process upon landing. I understand, Zara replied. But since this incident involves potential civil rights violations, my father specifically requested contemporaneous documentation. Sullivan's carefully maintained expression slipped momentarily, revealing his discomfort with the situation's escalation. I'll see what we can arrange, he said before returning to the cockpit. Once he was gone, Eleanor gave Zara an approving nod. Well handled. Never let them reduce a rights violation to a customer service issue. Meanwhile, Bradley had been observing from the galley, increasingly troubled by the situation. During a moment when Heather was occupied with the captain, he hastily scribbled a note on a cocktail napkin and folded it tightly. When he next passed through the cabin with a water service, he discreetly placed the napkin next to Zara's cup. She waited until he moved on before carefully unfolding it. This isn't the first time. I've witnessed similar incidents on previous flights. Willing to provide statement if needed. My full name is Bradley Wilson, employee hashtag at 22793. Zara quickly tucked the note into her book and glanced toward Bradley, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod before continuing his service. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Some passengers were openly supportive, offering Zara sympathetic smiles. Others seemed annoyed by the disruption, muttering about making everything about race and delaying the flight over a blanket. A middle-aged white man in the row behind Zara leaned forward. You know, this whole situation could have been avoided if you just accepted the initial answer. Not everything is discrimination. Some things are just life. Before Zara could respond, another passenger, a 30-something Asian American woman, interjected. Sir, with all due respect, I watched the same blanket denial and then distribution to others. If it happens to you once, maybe it's just life. When it follows a pattern that consistently affects certain people, it's systemic. The conversation spread through the cabin, with passengers taking sides. Some argued it was just a blanket, while others pointed out the principle at stake was far larger. In the cockpit, Captain Sullivan was on a secure line with the airline's chief operations officer. Jim, this isn't just any passenger complaint. The girl's father is a high-ranking FBI official in civil rights. This has federal investigation written all over it if we don't handle it properly. What's your assessment of the situation? The COO asked. Sullivan hesitated. Honestly? Reynolds has had similar complaints before. Nothing stuck because they were isolated incidents, but this time there are multiple witnesses, and the passenger has video. Plus, the father was already on the phone when it happened. Christ, muttered the COO. Options? We're over Tennessee now. We could divert to Nashville, replace the flight attendant, and continue to Atlanta. It would cause a delay, but it might contain the situation. And make national news, the COO countered. An FBI civil rights director's daughter forcing an emergency landing over discrimination. The optics would be terrible. While they debated options, Heather made another appearance in the cabin, her demeanor notably more subdued but still rigid. She approached Zara with forced professionalism. "Miss Washington, the captain has asked me to ensure your comfort for the remainder of the flight. Can I get you anything else?" The strategic retreat was obvious, an attempt to de-escalate without acknowledging wrongdoing. Zara, having grown up watching her father navigate complex situations, recognized the tactic. "No thank you, Ms. Reynolds. I'm comfortable now with the blanket that Mr. Wilson provided." Heather nodded stiffly and turned to leave, but paused when she noticed Zara's phone positioned on her tray table, still recording. "I need to inform you that recording crew members without consent is against airline policy," Heather stated, her tone regaining some of its earlier authority. "I'll have to ask you to stop recording and delete any video you've taken." Eleanor immediately interjected, "That's not accurate. FAA regulations permit passengers to record video on aircraft provided it doesn't interfere with crew member duties. There's no federal prohibition against recording a crew member who is in a public area of the plane performing their normal duties." Heather's eyes narrowed at the legal counter. "Our airline has its own policies regarding privacy, which are superseded by federal regulations," Eleanor replied calmly. "Additionally, when documentation of potential civil rights violations is concerned, prohibiting such recording could itself constitute obstruction." The standoff continued, with tensions rising once again. Bradley watched nervously from the galley, while Captain Sullivan, having returned from the cockpit, observed the deteriorating situation with growing concern. In Atlanta, Isaiah Washington was already in motion. After ending his call with the airline executives, he'd made 2 more calls, one to his deputy director to cover his afternoon meetings, and another to the FAA's Civil Rights Compliance Office. He was now driving toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, determined to be there when his daughter's flight landed, one way or another. His phone rang through his car speakers. It was Diana. "Isaiah? What's going on? Zara just texted me something about the plane maybe being grounded." Isaiah sighed, realizing Zara had likely messaged her mother to keep her informed. "There's a situation on her flight. A flight attendant singled her out, denied her service, then threatened her when she spoke up." "My God," Diana breathed. "Is she okay?" "She's handling it like a champion," Isaiah replied, unable to keep the pride from his voice despite the seriousness of the situation. "Just like we taught her." "And you're escalating to grounding the plane?" Diana asked, her tone suggesting she wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. "Only if necessary," Isaiah clarified. "I've been on with the airline executives. They know who I am and what I do. They're scrambling to contain this, but I need them to understand this isn't going away with a voucher and an apology." Diana was silent for a moment. "You know, when we discussed preparing her for these moments, I never imagined it would happen while she was alone at 30,000 feet. "Neither did I," Isaiah admitted. "But maybe it's fitting. She's learning that even in the most vulnerable situations, she has the right to stand up for herself." As they spoke, Isaiah's phone beeped with another incoming call, from the airline CEO. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sullivan speaking," the announcement came over the intercom, cutting through the tense atmosphere in the cabin. "Due to an ongoing situation, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Nashville International Airport. We apologize for any inconvenience." A collective groan rose from the passengers, followed by a buzz of speculation. Zara remained still, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. Had her complaint about a blanket really caused a plane to be diverted? "This isn't your fault," Eleanor said softly, seeming to read her thoughts. "When systems fail, the people who point it out aren't responsible for the consequences." The captain's voice returned, we ask that all passengers remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Upon arrival in Nashville, we ask that you remain on board while we address a staffing matter." Bradley appeared in the aisle, looking tense as he moved through the cabin assisting passengers. When he reached Zara's row, he leaned down slightly. "Just so you know, this isn't about you," he whispered. "It's about policy enforcement. You did nothing wrong." Heather, meanwhile, had stationed herself at the front of the cabin, pointedly avoiding eye contact with Zara while maintaining a professional demeanor with other passengers who approached with questions about the diversion. A businessman from the fifth row stood up, visibly irritated. "This is ridiculous. I'm going to miss my connection because of this nonsense." His complaint sparked others, and soon several passengers were openly discussing the situation, with blame being assigned in various directions. Some criticized Zara for making a federal case over a blanket, while others defended her right to equal treatment. "Young lady," a woman called from across the aisle, 2 rows up. "I hope you're satisfied. Dozens of people are now inconvenienced because you couldn't handle being told no." Zara's face burned with embarrassment, but she maintained her composure. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience," she replied evenly. "But I wasn't told no, I was told there were none available," which wasn't true. "Oh, for heaven's sake," the woman rolled her eyes. "It's a blanket, not a human right." Actually, another passenger interjected, "Equal service regardless of race is literally a civil right under federal law." As the debate intensified, Captain Sullivan appeared in the cabin again, this time with a more authoritative presence. "Folks, I need everyone to remain calm. This diversion is an operational decision made by airline management, not the result of any individual passenger's actions." While his statement was meant to defuse the situation, it had the opposite effect for some passengers who felt it was a corporate dodge. "Call it what it is, Captain," a man near the back of first class called out. "We're landing because someone couldn't do their job without discrimination, and now we're all paying the price." The aircraft began its descent into Nashville, the tension in the cabin palpable. Zara clutched her phone tightly, overwhelmed by the spotlight she found herself in. This had escalated far beyond anything she'd expected when she'd simply asked for a blanket. As the plane touched down and taxied to a gate, Heather was called to the cockpit again. When she emerged a few minutes later, her face was tight with suppressed emotion. She approached Bradley and whispered something that made his eyes widen before she disappeared into the rear galley. The cabin door remained closed as the minutes ticked by, unusual for an aircraft that had reached its gate. Finally, Captain Sullivan emerged from the cockpit again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We're waiting for some airline personnel to board before we continue our journey to Atlanta. It should be just a few more minutes." A collective murmur of frustration rippled through the cabin. A voice from economy called out, "How long is a few more minutes? Some of us have connections." The captain acknowledged the concern with a nod. "We expect to depart within the hour. The airline is already working to accommodate those with connecting flights." As he finished speaking, the cabin door opened, and 3 people in airline management uniforms boarded. They spoke briefly with the captain before one of them approached Zara. "Miss Washington. I'm Thomas Barnett, Regional Director of Customer Experience. On behalf of the airline, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. We're taking this matter very seriously." Zara nodded, uncomfortable with the public nature of the interaction. "Thank you. We'll be continuing to Atlanta with a different crew," Barnett explained. "In the meantime, is there anything we can do to make the remainder of your journey more comfortable?" Before Zara could respond, a notification appeared on her phone, a text from her father, "I'm at Nashville Airport. Airline management informed me of the diversion. I'm coming on board." The revelation that Isaiah Washington was physically at the Nashville airport stunned Zara. How had he gotten there so quickly? She realized he must have driven straight there after their call, anticipating the airline might divert the flight. Moments later, the unmistakable figure of Isaiah Washington appeared at the aircraft door. 6 feet 3 inches of imposing presence in a tailored suit, his FBI credentials visible on his belt, Isaiah scanned the cabin until his eyes found his daughter. Zara had never been so relieved and mortified simultaneously. Her father was here, physically on the plane, turning what had been a tense situation into something that felt momentous. Isaiah spoke briefly with the airline representatives before making his way to Zara's seat. The cabin had gone completely silent, all eyes following his deliberate progress through the aisle. "Dad," Zara managed, her voice small as he reached her. "I didn't mean for all this to happen." Isaiah's stern expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "You didn't cause this, Zara. You just exposed it." He turned to Eleanor, extending his hand. "Thank you for supporting my daughter, ma'am." Eleanor Blackwood, she introduced herself. "Your daughter handled herself with remarkable dignity. You should be proud." "I am," he replied simply before addressing the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your travel today. I'm Isaiah Washington, and that's my daughter Zara." What began as a simple request for a blanket exposed a pattern of behavior that required addressing. "I understand your frustration, but I hope you also understand that equality isn't just a lofty ideal, it's about practical realities, even ones as seemingly small as who gets a blanket on a cold airplane." Some passengers nodded in agreement while others looked away uncomfortably. The man who had complained earlier about missing his connection stood up. "Mr. Washington, I respect your position, but surely there was a way to address this without grounding an entire aircraft." "There was," Isaiah agreed, surprising the man. "The flight attendant could have provided equal service from the beginning. The airline could have addressed her behavior before it reached this point. Systems fail when accountability is delayed or denied. Today, accountability arrived mid-flight." As he spoke, the remaining passengers from economy who had been unaware of the first-class drama were now fully engaged, many recording the unprecedented scene on their phones. What had begun as a private instance of discrimination had transformed into a public conversation about systemic inequality, all because a 12-year-old girl had asked for a blanket. The conference room at Nashville International Airport buzzed with tense energy. On one side of the long table sat Zara and Isaiah Washington, along with Eleanor Blackwood, who had been invited to attend as a witness. On the opposite side were Thomas Barnett, the airline's regional director, along with Leslie Chen, the vice president of customer experience who had flown in from company headquarters on short notice, and Martin Goldstein, the airline's legal counsel. Heather Reynolds sat at the far end of the table, her posture rigid. Bradley Wilson had been asked to wait outside until called. "Let's begin by establishing the facts," Isaiah stated, his voice calm but authoritative as he placed his phone on the table. "We have video documentation of several incidents that occurred on Flight 1382 today." He played the first clip, Zara's recording showing Heather denying the blanket request, then later providing blankets to other passengers. The second clip captured the confrontation when Zara questioned the discrepancy. The third showed Heather threatening to move Zara to economy class for being disruptive. In addition, Isaiah continued, "We have written testimony from flight attendant Bradley Wilson, documenting this as part of a pattern of behavior he has witnessed on multiple occasions." He slid a copy of Bradley's statement across the table. Martin Goldstein picked it up, scanning it with a deepening frown. "Ms. Reynolds," Leslie Chen addressed the flight attendant directly, "would you like to respond to these allegations?" Heather straightened in her chair. "I made decisions based on resource management, not race. We had limited blankets, and I was prioritizing our highest-tier frequent flyers. Yet the video clearly shows you telling my daughter there were no blankets available, not that they were being reserved for specific passengers," Isaiah pointed out. "Additionally, you provided a blanket to another minor who boarded later, with no apparent verification of her frequent flyer status. I can't be expected to remember every interaction on a busy flight," Heather replied defensively. Eleanor Blackwood, who had been silently observing, leaned forward. "As someone who witnessed the entire exchange, I can confirm that Ms. Reynolds' actions demonstrated a clear pattern of disparate treatment. When questioned, she escalated to intimidation rather than correction. Thomas Barnett sighed heavily. Ms. Reynolds, this isn't the first complaint of this nature against you. We have reports from 3 previous flights that follow a similar pattern. This revelation clearly surprised Heather, whose confident demeanor faltered. Those complaints were investigated and dismissed. They were handled internally, Martin Goldstein clarified, but never formally dismissed. In fact, you were transferred from Jetstream Airlines last year following similar allegations, were you not? The room fell silent as the implication became clear. Heather had a history of such behavior that had been swept under the rug and managed through transfers rather than addressed directly. Leslie Chen turned to the Washingtons. Mr. Washington, what outcome are you seeking here? Isaiah glanced at Zara before responding. My daughter and I aren't interested in financial compensation. What we want is systemic change. This isn't about one flight attendant or one incident, it's about an airline culture that has apparently allowed discriminatory behavior to continue unchecked. He slid a folder across the table. This contains a proposal for policy changes, training programs, and accountability measures that would address the underlying issues. It also includes a timeline for implementation and metrics for measuring success. Martin Goldstein opened the folder, eyebrows rising as he reviewed the detailed proposal. This is comprehensive. I've been investigating civil rights violations for 15 years, Isaiah replied. I understand what meaningful change requires. Leslie Chen studied the proposal thoughtfully. Some of these measures would require significant resource allocation. Less than a class action lawsuit would require, Eleanor Blackwood observed mildly, causing Martin Goldstein to shift uncomfortably. Are you threatening litigation? He asked. No, Isaiah answered. We're offering a path forward that addresses the real issues. The alternative is letting this play out in the court of public opinion, and possibly actual courts. Social media is already buzzing with videos from passengers. Several news outlets have reached out for comment. This can be a moment of constructive change or a PR disaster. The choice is yours. As if on cue, Leslie Chen's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, then looked up with renewed urgency. CNN is reporting on the diversion. They're calling it Blanket Gate. Thomas Barnett winced visibly. Let's call in Mr. Wilson, Leslie suggested, signaling to an assistant to bring in Bradley. When Bradley entered, he appeared nervous but resolute. His testimony was clear and specific, detailing not only the incident with Zara but several others he had witnessed during his brief time working with Heather. On a flight last week, he explained, a black businessman in first class asked for headphones twice and was told we were out, only for Ms. Reynolds to provide them to another passenger 10 minutes later. I noticed because I had just restocked the headphones myself. As Bradley's testimony continued, Heather's face grew increasingly flushed. When he finished, she burst out, "This is a witch hunt. You can't possibly take the word of a probationary employee and a child over someone with 15 years of experience." Ms. Reynolds, Leslie Chen said firmly, your experience is precisely what concerns us. These don't appear to be isolated incidents or mistakes, but rather a pattern of behavior spanning years and multiple airlines. Martin Goldstein conferred quietly with Leslie before addressing the room. In light of the evidence presented, we believe immediate action is warranted. Leslie nodded in agreement. Ms. Reynolds, you are being placed on administrative leave effective immediately pending a full investigation. Mr. Washington, we're prepared to accept most of the measures outlined in your proposal, with some adjustments to the implementation timeline. Isaiah looked to Zara, who gave a small nod of approval. That's acceptable, he replied. But I want regular progress reports and transparency throughout the implementation process. Agreed, Leslie confirmed. And on behalf of the airline, I extend our sincerest apologies to you, Zara. What you experienced today was unacceptable, and your composure throughout has been remarkable. Zara, who had been mostly silent during the proceedings, finally spoke. I just wanted to be warm, like everyone else, she said simply, the statement cutting through the corporate language and legal considerations to the heart of the matter. Heather, seeing the unified front against her, made a last attempt to salvage her position. "This is my livelihood. You can't destroy my career over a blanket." "This isn't about a blanket," Isaiah replied calmly. "It's about dignity. It's about equal treatment under the law. The blanket was just the visible symptom of a deeper problem. And your career isn't being destroyed, you're being held accountable. There's a difference." As the meeting concluded with agreements being formalized, Eleanor Blackwood rested a hand gently on Zara's shoulder. "This is how change happens," she told the girl quietly. "Not always through grand gestures or famous cases, but through ordinary people refusing to accept the small injustices that happen every day." Zara nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. The incident that had begun with a simple request for a blanket had transformed into something far more significant, a moment of accountability that might prevent countless similar experiences for others in the future. Outside the conference room, a replacement flight crew was already being briefed for the delayed journey to Atlanta. The passengers, who had been provided meal vouchers and compensation for the delay, would soon be boarding again, many of them now acutely aware of the civil rights drama that had unfolded at 30,000 feet. 6 months later, Zara Washington stood at a podium in the Atlanta Civil Rights Museum, adjusting the microphone to her height as she prepared to address the audience of young people gathered for the Youth Leaders for Equality conference. "When I boarded that flight last winter," she began, her voice stronger and more confident than it had been 6 months earlier, "I wasn't trying to make history or create change. I just wanted a blanket because I was cold." Gentle laughter rippled through the audience of teenagers and preteens, all participants in a program designed to empower young people to recognize and address discrimination in their daily lives. "But what happened next taught me something important about systems and change," Zara continued. "Sometimes the smallest requests can reveal the biggest problems." In the front row, Isaiah and Diana Washington watched their daughter with evident pride. Beside them sat Eleanor Blackwood, who had become a mentor to Zara in the months following the incident. "The airline didn't just issue an apology and move on," Zara explained to her audience. "They implemented real changes that have made a difference." She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, displaying a list of policy changes the airline had enacted in the past 6 months. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff. Anonymous reporting system for passengers experiencing discrimination. Regular audits of service equality using mystery passengers. Performance metrics that included equitable treatment measures. A transparent complaint resolution process with third-party oversight. "These changes didn't happen because one flight attendant denied me a blanket," Zara emphasized. "They happened because my father and I, along with allies like Ms. Blackwood and even flight attendant Bradley Wilson, refused to accept that discrimination was just the way things are." In another part of the country, Heather Reynolds sat in a counseling session, part of the restorative justice approach she had eventually agreed to after being terminated from the airline. "I still don't think I was being racist," she insisted to her counselor. "I was just doing my job how I thought it should be done." "Let's examine that belief," her counselor suggested gently. "When you decided who received limited resources, what factors were you considering, consciously or unconsciously?" The process of confronting her biases had been challenging and uncomfortable for Heather. Initially resistant, she had begun to recognize patterns in her behavior only after reviewing the documentation of dozens of similar incidents throughout her career. Meanwhile, Bradley Wilson had found a new role within the airline's training department. After his testimony had proven crucial to the investigation, he had been approached about helping develop the new bias training program, bringing his first-hand observations to the curriculum. "The most common defense I hear," Bradley explained to a class of new flight attendants, "is, I treat everyone the same. But the data tells a different story. We all have biases. The key is recognizing them and creating systems that help us counteract them rather than reinforce them." Back at the youth conference, Zara was concluding her presentation. "6 weeks ago, I flew to visit my dad again," she told the audience. "Same airline, same route. When I boarded, the flight attendant, someone I'd never met before, smiled and said, we have blankets available if you need one, Ms. Washington." I almost cried, not because I was recognized, but because I realized the system had actually changed. She paused, looking out at the young faces watching her intently. "That's what justice looks like sometimes. Not dramatic courtroom scenes or historic legislation, but small, consistent changes that ensure everyone gets a blanket when they're cold, regardless of what they look like." After her speech, as attendees mingled during a break, a young girl approached Zara tentatively. "I'm flying alone next month," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "I'm a little scared after hearing your story." Zara smiled reassuringly. "Don't be scared, be prepared. Know your rights, document everything if something seems wrong, and remember that speaking up isn't just for you, it's for everyone who might face the same situation after you." The girl nodded thoughtfully. "I'm going to download that rights app your dad helped create." The Equal Flight mobile application had been one of the outcomes of the incident, a collaboration between the FBI's Civil Rights Division and several civil liberties organizations. The app provided travelers with information about their rights, documentation tools, and direct reporting mechanisms for discrimination experienced during travel. Isaiah, who had joined his daughter and was listening to the exchange, added, "The app has recorded over 200,000 downloads since its launch 3 months ago. Every report helps us identify patterns and address systemic issues." Later that evening, as the Washington family had dinner with Eleanor Blackwood, they reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a denied blanket. "I received an interesting email today," Eleanor mentioned. "A law professor at Emory is using your case as a teaching tool in her civil rights class. They're calling it, the blanket case, a study in how seemingly small acts of discrimination can reveal larger systemic issues." Diana smiled at her daughter. "How does it feel to be a case study?" Zara considered the question seriously. "Strange, but good, I think. If other kids learn from what happened to me, then something positive came from an uncomfortable situation." Isaiah nodded approvingly. "That's the heart of progress, turning individual experiences into collective improvement." As they continued their meal, Zara's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert about a discrimination lawsuit filed against a different airline, one where passengers had used the Equal Flight app to document a pattern of discriminatory seat reassignments. "It's working," she said simply, showing the alert to her father. "It is," Isaiah agreed. "Change happens slowly, then all at once." What happened on that flight was just one small moment in a much larger story. Eleanor raised her glass in a toast. To equal treatment at 30,000 feet, and everywhere else. As their glasses clinked together, Zara reflected on how a simple request for a blanket had cascaded into meaningful change. She hadn't boarded that flight intending to become an activist, but she had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed, and a voice that, however young, deserved to be heard. The next day, as Zara boarded her return flight to Boston, a flight attendant greeted her with a warm smile and offered her a blanket before she even had to ask. It wasn't special treatment, every passenger received the same offer. And in that simple moment of equality, Zara found the most profound resolution of all. This story teaches us that discrimination often hides in seemingly small interactions, a denied blanket, a dismissive tone, an unjustified policy. What makes these moments significant isn't their immediate impact but the patterns they reveal. Zara's experience shows that speaking up, even when uncomfortable, is essential for creating change. The courage to document injustice, whether through video evidence or written testimony, transforms individual experiences into catalysts for systemic improvement. Isaiah's approach demonstrates that meaningful change requires both accountability for specific incidents and broader structural reforms that prevent future discrimination. Eleanor's wisdom reminds us that allyship matters. When witnesses speak up, they validate experiences that might otherwise be dismissed. Bradley proves that insiders within problematic systems can become powerful agents of reform when they choose integrity over complicity. Perhaps most importantly, Zara's journey teaches us that age doesn't determine impact. A 12-year-old girl's simple request for equal treatment ultimately transformed an entire corporation's approach to civil rights, creating ripple effects far beyond that single flight. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in everyday situations? Comment below with your experience. Did you speak up or wish you had? Like this video if Zara's courage inspired you to recognize the importance of addressing small injustices. Subscribe for more powerful stories about standing up against racism and discrimination. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters, no matter their age or position. Thank you for watching, and remember, when we refuse to accept everyday discrimination, we create the possibility for extraordinary change.